so happy we alive.
Bill Zimmerman is a partner in the firm of Zimmerman and Markham out of Santa Monica. He is a professional political consultant, has been involved with more than 200 campaigns. Only a half dozen or so have been medical marijuana campaigns. Of all those he has touched, he has won. He is probably the sharpest political mind I've ever met, and I'm delighted he's with us today. Bill Zimmerman.
Thank you, Dick. I appreciate that. I'm probably going to say some things that most of you will disagree with in the next few minutes, so I decided to start by saying something that we can all definitely agree on. When Dick posed the dichotomy between the incremental approach, which I'm to represent here on this podium, and the all-at-once approach, he was not describing two time intervals in which we get from where we are to where we want to go. He was describing two methodologies by which we get from where we are to where we want to go. I think we would all agree that whether the method is incremental or the method is all at once, we want to get to where we're going as fast as possible. So I'm going to argue that the incremental approach is the fastest way to get to the goal that we all want to reach. Now, figuring out how you get somewhere, you first have to recognize that what we're talking about is developing a political strategy and an understanding of the tactics that best serve that strategy. Before we can develop such a strategy, we have to make a clear, dispassionate, unbiased assessment of where we are, what our strengths and weaknesses are, what our opponents' strengths and weaknesses are, what the best messages we have against them, they have against us, the best counters to those messages on both sides, and so forth. When we begin that assessment, I think we run into something that some of us won't like. We're fond of attacking the government in this movement for being the impediment between us and our goal. And certainly there is no doubt that this government at all levels enforces laws in an overzealous, unrealistic, and stupid way. But we also at the same time seem to think that there's an enormous contradiction between the government and the people. And the fact is, there isn't. The people are not out there demanding what we in this room have come together the last couple of days to demand. Quite the contrary. And it's only if we take into consideration what the people out there want that we can develop a credible political strategy. So one of the ways in which we begin that process and make that assessment is through public opinion polling. And public opinion polling has a very bad rap in this society. And it has a bad rap because we have too many political leaders from the very top of our political structure to the very bottom who don't make a move without consulting a poll. And we think that that's the bankruptcy of leadership. To some extent it is, because a real leader takes a society from someplace where it isn't now and doesn't necessarily want to go to, and he takes it there because he understands that it's in society's interest to take it there. That kind of leadership disappears in a society in which politics is driven by polling. But the other side to that coin, and I would argue there is another side, is that politics and polling are creating a kind of democracy that we didn't have in this country before, because leaders are constrained not to do anything that people don't want them to do. Now, most of the time, looking at that issue in the abstract, we would say, well, that makes sense. You know, we all believe in democracy, and the people have the right to decide where they want to go. But when we look at the same phenomenon as a movement that's trying to achieve something that society doesn't agree with, then we have a different attitude. The fact is, this country is, to a very limited extent, a democracy. Leaders can't go too much farther than where people want to go. When they do, things happen to them. They get impeached, they get shot, they get voted out of office next time, their party loses control of Congress so that whoever is in the White House becomes more or less irrelevant. So leaders are constrained by where the people are. We have to change where the people are in this country, because all of the political polling that we've done in my organization, that other organizations have done, that the mass media has done, all indicate that only a small minority of America wants to significantly change drug policies such that nobody would be arrested for smoking marijuana or using any of the other prohibited drugs. Maybe a third at most. Usually a third when you confine the legalization to marijuana. 20% at best when you talk about legalizing all drugs. Some geographic differences. The southeastern states are more conservative on these questions than the western states and the so-called Rust Belt states. But generally speaking, you're talking about a fifth to a third of the people who will take your position, with at least half the people adamantly opposed, and the remainder undecided. So when you face that kind of situation, you have to say the first element of my political strategy is to educate people, is to help people understand that the position they're taking is wrong, ill-informed, misguided, whatever. Because only when you change the minds of enough of those people will leadership respond, because leadership isn't really leadership is fellowship, when leadership is run by political polling. So if political public opinion is the fulcrum around which policy revolves, you've got to change people's attitudes. So that's an educational strategy. The question then becomes, how do you educate people? How do you educate them on a mass level? Because we're talking about the need to communicate significantly with a number of people that's almost unimaginable. I mean, in California, where I do a lot of elections, I get often into discussions with people about the relative importance of grassroots versus media politics, and I'm always on the media side. And the reason I am is that I tell them, if you set up a grassroots organization in California, and I said this to the activists at the beginning of the 215 campaign in January '96, if you set up a grassroots organization in California that has the capacity to speak to 1,000 people every night of the week, every week of the year, how long will it take you to speak to the electorate one time? And the answer is 33 years. So how can you do that? You can't. So you have to communicate with people through the media. And when you communicate with people through the media, you don't get a chance to say very much. Sound bites are increasingly short. Commercials are only 30 or 60 seconds long. So you need to develop mediated messages that go out to people in understandable chunks that resonate with something that's already inside them, if you're going to move their opinion. So in order to do that, the social engineering that Dick referred to before begins with complex opinion polls, which test not only how people feel on issues, but which messages they're most responsive to, which arguments work differentially well against those arguments on both sides of the issue, so that you can get an understanding not only of how people think and feel about an issue, but where the leverage points are for changing their minds, for moving them a little. So we've done all this polling. What have we found? It's very interesting. 80-20, people think the drug war is a failure. 70-30, they think it can never work, no matter how many resources the society puts into enforcement. How many are for total drug legalization in the face of this inevitable failure? 20%. It's a complete flip. So you can't work at that level. You have to go down and look at what makes up that opinion at lower levels. Well, there are a lot of positive leverage points we have. People feel very differently about dealers than they do about users. It'd be much easier to pass legislation that focused on that.